said it was his first marriage. Then I found his divorce papers filed less than 6 months ago. I found out about his divorce by accident. That's what really gets me. He didn't slip up. He didn't confess. I wasn't snooping. I was packing. I was folding one of his suits into a travel bag when I noticed a manila folder tucked beneath a pile of belts on the top shelf. It wasn't hidden, just inconveniently placed. Like something you meant to get to but kept forgetting. I pulled it down, half expecting it to be tax paperwork or old leases. It wasn't. Inside were divorce papers. His name, her name, finalized less than 4 months before the day he proposed to me. I remember standing there, holding those papers, staring at the date like it had to be wrong. I even checked the year twice. I wanted it to be a filing error, some weird misprint, but the signatures were real, her and his. He had told me he'd never been married. Not even close. He'd said it with such quiet conviction that I'd never doubted it. "You'll be my first everything," he whispered one night, his forehead resting against mine. "I never wanted the whole marriage thing until you." What a beautifully wrapped lie. I didn't confront him that night. I closed the folder, slid it back into its spot, zipped up the bag like nothing happened, and smiled when he got home. He kissed my forehead, told me we were only a few weeks away from forever. I nodded. Stomach coiled so tight I thought I'd be sick. That night I lay awake, watching him sleep. My mind ran in circles, asking the same questions. Who is she? Why lie? Was I a rebound? Was I just a distraction while his heart still belonged to someone else? The next morning, I called out of work and began digging. I looked her up. Angela Myers. She was beautiful in a quietly devastating way, not flashy, not loud. Soft brown eyes, warm smile, the kind of woman who looked like she'd be the calm in any storm. Her LinkedIn said she worked in HR for a publishing house downtown. I didn't recognize the name of the company, but it was local. I dug deeper. An old wedding blog still had cached photos of their ceremony. They'd been married just under 2 years. There were photos of them hiking in Montana, drinking coffee in Iceland, kissing on a rooftop at sunset, all time-stamped within the last 3 years. It wasn't ancient history, it was yesterday. I stared at their photos together and tried to see the cracks. Did he look unhappy? Were his smiles forced? But he looked happy. He looked how he looked with me, and that was what scared me most. The next week, I played along. I let him talk about wedding invitations, guest lists, color palettes. I smiled when he mentioned how excited his mom was to help. I kissed him back when he hugged me from behind, but something inside me had fractured. Every time he looked at me, I wondered what else he was hiding. I couldn't ask him directly. Not yet. I needed to know more. I needed to understand what I was to him, if anything. So I messaged Angela. It took me an hour to draft that message. I kept it neutral, respectful, told her who I was, that I recently found some documents with her name and his, that I wasn't looking for drama, just the truth. I ended it with, "I hope you'll understand why I'm reaching out. I think I deserve to know what I'm stepping into." She replied the same evening. "Hi, I'm not surprised someone reached out. He's done this before." Those were her first words. She said they'd been separated for 8 months before filing, but she found out afterward that he'd already been seeing someone new. Not me, someone before me. Some bartender he met on a business trip. When Angela confronted him, he gaslit her. Told her she was paranoid, insecure, crazy. She said she left with barely any dignity intact. "He doesn't know how to be alone," she wrote. "He finds a new fantasy before he ends the old one." That line stayed with me. A new fantasy. Was that all I was? I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in my car outside the grocery store for nearly an hour, phone on my lap, engine off. My heart felt quiet, hollow. When I finally got home, he was in the kitchen, cooking dinner like nothing was wrong. He asked if I'd picked up the wine he liked. I told him I forgot. He smiled. "No worries. We have plenty of time to pick it up later." Later. After the wedding. Later, after I'd signed my name next to his. Later, after I was too far in to back out without tearing myself apart. I decided then that there wouldn't be a later, but I wouldn't leave quietly. I wanted him to feel what I felt, not in some dramatic, fiery revenge way. I just wanted the illusion to break for him the way it had broken for me. Because sometimes the cruelest thing you can do is show someone exactly who they are. The next few days passed like a surreal performance I couldn't exit. I played my role, dutiful fiancé, laughing at his jokes, nodding through wedding planning, pretending I didn't know I was engaged to a man who lied every time he opened his mouth. It was like watching myself in a film I hadn't agreed to star in. Every interaction felt like static behind glass. What broke me wasn't the lie itself. Not entirely. It was how effortlessly he wore the mask. How casually He made future plans while burying the past beneath layers of denial. I started noticing how polished he really was. Too polished. Every story had a perfect anecdote. Every flaw he admitted was endearing, curated, softened. He never stumbled. And now I saw that for what it was. A performance perfected by repetition. I became obsessed with details. His calendar, his late-night work calls, his stories that didn't quite line up anymore. He'd say he had dinner with a client, but the receipts I found in his pockets told different stories. Bars he'd never mentioned, bills for two, wine he never ordered when we were together. One night, as he showered, I opened his laptop. I didn't feel guilty anymore. I didn't even feel angry. I just wanted the full picture. It was locked, of course, but I'd watched him type the password enough times to guess it. It opened on the second try. Emails, lots of them. Most mundane. But one folder caught my eye. Archived. Private. I opened it. Dozens of exchanges with different women, most flirtatious, some explicitly romantic. The timestamps ranged from 6 months ago to as recent as 2 weeks. And one thread, the longest one, was with someone named M. No full name, just the initial. They talked like they were old friends, or old flames. She mentioned a weekend in Vermont, a necklace he'd given her, a fight they'd had about him moving on too quickly. He'd written, "You know I can't stop thinking about you. It's not the same with her, but I owe her this now." Her. Me. I closed the laptop slowly, as if the words would explode if I moved too fast. The next morning, I packed a small bag. I told him I was visiting my sister for the weekend. He kissed me goodbye, reminded me to send him pictures. I smiled again. My jaw hurt from how often I was faking it. I didn't go to my sister's. I checked into a small Airbnb on the other side of town, turned off my phone, and just sat with the weight of everything. Angela. The other women. The timeline. The manipulation. I had to keep reminding myself that this wasn't about a single lie. It was about the architecture of his deception. The entire relationship was built on sand, and I had been so ready to build a house on top of it. It took me a full day to stop shaking. The second day, I started writing everything down. Every inconsistency. Every moment that made sense now in hindsight. I cataloged it like evidence. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I needed to see it laid out. I needed to prove to myself that I hadn't imagined the cracks. I still hadn't told him I knew. I wanted that moment to be mine. To choose when the curtain would drop. It came sooner than expected. He texted me that night. A photo of my favorite dessert captioned, "Made this for you. Can't wait for you to come home." And something snapped. I stared at the image. That stupid chocolate tart, and thought, he thinks he still owns my reality. So I did what any woman on the edge might do. I printed the divorce papers, the screenshots of his emails, the wedding photos with Angela. I printed out the message thread between him and M. I put them in an envelope. On the front, I wrote, "For the man who told me I was his first." Then I drove home. He was in the living room, watching TV, barefoot, relaxed. He turned, smiled, opened his arms. "You're home early." "I missed you," I lied again, the last lie I'd ever tell him. I handed him the envelope. "I got you something." He looked confused but took it. He opened it slowly, like he thought it was a surprise card. I watched his face as his eyes scanned the first page, then the second. His smile evaporated like mist. The silence between us expanded until it felt like a scream. He didn't speak for a full minute, just kept flipping through the pages like they might rearrange themselves into something less damning. Finally, he said, "Where did you get these?" "Where do you think?" He stood, reached for me. "Wait, just let me explain." "Explain what? That I'm not the first? That I'm not the only? That I was just the most convenient at the time?" "It wasn't like that." "No," I said, stepping back. "It was exactly like that. You just didn't think I'd ever look." He tried again. "I didn't want to hurt you." I laughed. It was bitter and involuntary. "You proposed to me while you were still tangled in your last marriage and texting another woman about Vermont. You didn't want to hurt me? You planned to spend your life lying to me." "I panicked," he said, voice rising. "I didn't think you'd understand. You thought you could curate the truth like everything else in your life. But people aren't Pinterest boards. You don't get to delete the parts that mess up the aesthetic." His mouth opened, then closed. "I'm done," I said quietly. "I won't be your next placeholder." And I left. No suitcase, no final words, just the sound of the door clicking shut behind me. I wish I could say I felt empowered the moment I walked out, that I felt strong and independent and healed. But the truth is, I sat in my car for over an hour in the parking lot, gripping the steering wheel so hard my fingers went numb. I didn't cry. Not then. I just sat there, stunned, hollowed out, trying to process the weight of all I had just burned down. It's strange how even a lie can become your home if you live in it long enough. When I finally started the engine and drove back to the Airbnb, I didn't feel free. I felt exiled. From my plans, my future, the version of myself I thought was real, the wedding boards I'd made, the dress I'd picked out, the flights we had booked for our honeymoon. It all sat in my head like the ghost of a life that had never actually existed. He texted, called, emailed, over and over. Please talk to me. I didn't mean for it to go this far. You don't understand what Angela did to me. Let me explain. I blocked him. For a week, I didn't speak to anyone. I ordered food I barely ate. I took showers that didn't make me feel clean. I stared at walls and ceiling fans in silence until my thoughts looped in ways I couldn't untangle. But eventually, the silence made room for something else. Reflection. And then fury. Not just at him. At myself. At the woman I had allowed myself to become. So willing to believe the fantasy that I ignored every red flag. I thought of the time I asked if he had old photos of his family. And he changed the subject, of how he insisted I never friend his mother on Facebook, of how he always dodged mutual acquaintances, all the moments I chose to interpret as quirks, not alarms. He didn't fool me alone. I fooled myself too. It was Angela who finally pulled me out of the fog. She messaged me again. Short, kind. She said she'd heard through mutual friends that I'd called off the engagement. She told me I was brave, that not everyone walks away when the illusion breaks. And then she said something that stuck with me. You don't owe him closure. You owe yourself peace. I wanted that peace. I just didn't know what it looked like anymore. Eventually, I checked back into my own apartment. I'd never officially moved in with him, though we were spending most nights at his place by the end. My space felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else, but it was mine. The dress was still hanging in my closet. It was simple. Satin. Minimalist. I'd loved how it made me feel. Timeless. Like the woman he described me as. I pulled it out one night and stared at it for a long time before finally stuffing it into a donation bag. Let some other woman rewrite its meaning. I also quit my job. Not out of impulse, but because it reminded me too much of that version of myself that tolerated just enough deception to stay silent. My boss was understanding. My coworkers were shocked, but I needed distance from everything familiar. Everything that had anchored me to the version of me he had curated. With a small severance and savings, I booked a solo trip to Iceland. It was meant to be our honeymoon spot. But this time, I went alone. And it was cold, and lonely, and perfect. I hiked in silence, sat in geothermal pools under foggy skies, drank strong coffee at quiet cafes, and somewhere in the middle of that snowy stillness, I started to come back to myself. Not all at once, but enough to breathe again. It wasn't about healing from him anymore. It was about remembering who I was before him. Before lies became lullabies, before apologies replaced intimacy, before I allowed someone else's version of me to replace my own. I stayed for 3 weeks. When I returned, the city felt new. My apartment felt lighter. I started freelance consulting, something I'd always wanted to do but never dared. I spent more time with friends I'd neglected. I stopped avoiding mirrors. And then, about 2 months after the breakup, I saw him again. It was accidental. A bookstore downtown. He was standing in line, holding a novel I'd once recommended. I almost didn't recognize him. He looked smaller, not physically, just dimmed, like the shine had worn off. He saw me, froze. I nodded once. That's all. And then I walked away. Not because I hated him, not because I wanted to prove anything, but because I didn't need a final word. I already had my ending. After seeing him at the bookstore, I thought the memory of him would flood back. The warmth, the charm, the moments I once clung to like life rafts, but it didn't happen. There was no tidal wave, just a quiet ripple, a faint reminder of a person I once believed in, a character in a story I no longer related to. That night, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the city pulse below me. I realized I hadn't thought about him in days, not really, not with longing or regret. He had become like background noise I'd finally learned how to mute. What I did think about, though, was why I hadn't seen the truth sooner, how deeply I'd buried my instincts to protect the fantasy. That bothered me more than anything he did. Because somewhere deep down, I think I always knew. It took me weeks to admit that out loud, even to myself. I had glimpses, moments when something didn't feel right. A hesitation in his voice, a flash of deflection in his eyes, a story that sounded just a little too rehearsed. But I'd talked myself out of those feelings every time. I told myself love meant trust, and trust meant silence. What I know now is that love without honesty isn't love. It's theater. And I'd been the audience and the prop all at once. I started writing again, not about him. Not directly, just about truth and betrayal and resilience. It wasn't meant to be published, it was just for me. Pages and pages of raw thoughts, some bitter, some hopeful, some written at 3 a.m., when the ghosts of what-ifs still tried to visit. One of my friends, Rachel, read a few of the pages. She cried. People need this, she said. You need to share this. So I did. I posted one essay anonymously on a small relationship blog. It was called The Man Who Lied to My Future. It went viral. Emails poured in. Strangers sharing their own stories of deception, manipulation, gaslighting. People who stayed too long. People who left just in time. People who never got the apology they deserved, but survived anyway. Reading their words felt like building a bridge across a canyon I thought only I had fallen into. I kept writing. One night, I got a message from a woman whose story sounded eerily familiar. She said her fiancé had been hiding a previous marriage and still kept in contact with his ex. She hadn't left yet. She didn't know how. I told her the truth. It hurts. It breaks you. But not as much as staying does. And I meant it. Around that time, I also reconnected with someone I hadn't spoken to in years. An old college friend named Jonah. We'd stayed friendly through social media, but hadn't talked in forever. He messaged me after reading one of my essays. Hey, I'm not sure if you remember, but we once sat on a campus bench for 3 hours talking about what makes people lie. I think you were already a better writer than you knew. I smiled at the message for a long time. We started catching up, slowly, casually. No pressure, just two people who used to know each other, rediscovering common ground. Jonah was everything my ex wasn't. Unpolished, but sincere. A little awkward, but deeply transparent. He didn't say things to impress me. He said things because they were true. He once told me, I've been through my share of wreckage, but the thing about wreckage is sometimes it clears the path. We went for coffee, then lunch, then long walks, then silence that didn't feel heavy. It wasn't fireworks, it was something better, safe, honest, human. And still, I was cautious. I made no promises. I drew clear lines. I told him about my past, the lies, the betrayal. I told him I wasn't ready to fall again. He didn't try to convince me otherwise. He just said, then let's just walk. We don't have to fall. It's funny how healing happens, not in big moments, but in tiny, quiet ones. A smile that feels real, a question asked with care, a night without fear. And yet, sometimes the past likes to knock one last time, just to make sure you've really closed the door. It came in the form of a message request. From him, the man who once promised forever and handed me fiction. I stared at the notification for a full 5 minutes before opening it. I read your essays. I know they're about me. I deserved worse. I wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly. I hope you're doing okay. I didn't reply. Not out of spite, but because I had nothing left to say. The truth had already been spoken, just not to him. To myself. There's a strange peace that settles when you stop needing the apology to move on. I didn't respond to his message. I didn't need to. Every word I had wanted to scream. Every question I had begged the universe to answer had already been folded into the pages of those essays, into the air I exhaled each morning without him. Letting go wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fire and fury. It was quiet, like finally releasing something you've been gripping too tightly, only to realize your hand had been bleeding the whole time. A few months later, I was invited to speak at a small local writing panel. Independent authors, essayists, and bloggers. I almost said no. I didn't feel like someone who had anything to teach, but my friend Rachel pushed me. You lived it, she said. That makes you qualified. The night before the panel, I sat on my bedroom floor, surrounded by scattered drafts and notes, trying to decide what I even wanted to say. Was this really a story about heartbreak? Or was it something else? And then it hit me. This wasn't about him. Not anymore. It was about me. About the woman who learned how to stop romanticizing red flags, who found the strength to walk out, not because she stopped loving, but because she started remembering how to love herself. At the event, I stood in front of a modest crowd of strangers, holding nothing but a few index cards and years of hard-earned clarity. I told them the truth, that I once almost married a man whose greatest talent was performing sincerity, that I ignored my instincts because I was afraid to start over again. That betrayal doesn't always come like a storm. It sometimes arrives dressed in tenderness and promises. But mostly, I told them what I had learned. You don't leave because you hate someone. You leave because you finally love yourself enough not to stay. After I finished, people came up one by one. Some hugged me. Some shared their own stories in rushed whispers, as if saying it out loud might make the pain more real. Others just nodded silently, eyes glassy, and walked away. It wasn't validation I needed. It was connection. And I finally had it. Not through a relationship, but through something far more lasting. Honesty. Jonah was in the audience that day. He stood in the back, hands in his pockets, watching with this soft, steady expression. When we locked eyes, he smiled. Not the kind that says, I'm proud of you, but the kind that says, I see you. Afterward, we walked to a nearby bench and just sat for a while. No big declarations, no heavy talks, Just two people watching the sun fall over the city like a curtain closing gently. You ever think about rewriting that ending? He asked after a while. I looked at him. Which one? The one with him. I thought about it. About everything I'd been through. About the pain, yes, but also the strength that bloomed in its place. The clarity. The voice I'd found. The unexpected turns that brought me to this exact moment. And I said, no, some stories aren't meant to be rewritten. They're meant to be survived. He nodded. Sometimes, I still think about the life I almost had. The wedding, the house, the anniversary dinners. But they feel more like daydreams I once scribbled in a notebook as a teenager. Pretty, but fictional. What I have now is smaller maybe. Simpler, but it's real. I've rebuilt slowly, intentionally, with no illusions, no performance, and no lies. I still write. The blog that started as anonymous is now under my real name. Readers message me from all over. Some ask for advice. Others just say, thank you. I answer when I can. I listen when I can't. I remind them that healing isn't linear, and that walking away is one of the bravest things a person can do. Jonah and I, we're still walking. Still learning each other's rhythms. Still discovering what it means to show up, fully and honestly. We're not rushing toward labels or milestones. Just choosing each other, one day at a time. And me? I'm okay. More than okay. Because I finally understand. The greatest love story I'll ever write is the one where I save myself.